Scott, thanks for being here today. Can you tell us what were really the logistics of Walmart's response to the disaster and the recovery process after the earthquake and the tsunami in Japan?
You know, I was actually 15 minutes from boarding a flight in LA back to Asia when I got an SMS that there had been an earthquake, which happens quite regularly in Japan, as you well know. But they said a tsunami warning had gone out, which usually signals something a lot more serious. I then had to get on a plane, and so I was out of communication for 15 hours. And when I landed, already our emergency response centers in Tokyo, Hong Kong, our region office, and the home office in Bentonville had been activated, and a lot of progress had been made, but not nearly the progress I would have expected after 15 hours. And I think that the lesson in all of this is that, you know, when I was leading Asia for my previous company, when the earthquake happened in 2004 and the tsunami that killed hundreds of thousands in Southeast Asia, there was this kind of expectation of lesser developed economically countries. Of course, it takes more time in order to be able to do recovery. But I think what Katrina and Sendai have taught us is it doesn't matter how well you're prepared. It doesn't matter how good your infrastructure is. It doesn't matter your economic wealth. No one can be prepared for the challenges, mainly logistical, that occur. And so although in the first 15 hours we had kicked off some pretty serious streams of work on, first and foremost, associate safety, trying to just locate our nearly 2,000 people there. The second was around relief and emergency supply and what we thought we could do to try and bring aid to all the affected citizens. And the third was just assessing. We had 26 stores there. What happened to the stores? Are they there? The distribution centers, were any washed away? Because we had 2 stores that were within the 3-kilometer tsunami path. So what we learned was, one, we were a lot less prepared than we thought. We have a pretty good standardized approach to disaster preparedness, and it fell short. And we've used Japan as a global reset, and in fact we've had teams there recently. So the first thing was that in Japan we didn't expect the communication to cease for 12 hours. We just couldn't reach people for 12 hours. The satellites went out because, or the communications went out because the networks were overloaded, and we couldn't actually get in touch with our folks. We couldn't get in touch with the store managers. And as a result, we actually didn't have a lot of information as to what was happening for probably the first 12 hours. The sort of, I think, second biggest shock to us was how quickly fuel disappeared. And this was a national issue. So even though we had the goods and we had a will to move the goods to try and help, we just couldn't get fuel for the trucks. And in fact, we got quite a bit of help from the U.S. government. We sent 95 tons of relief supplies out of Shanghai. And the U.S. military helped us. The U.S. government allowed us to base out of Yokota Air Base. And they helicoptered for us a lot of the water and some of the tents and the blankets, etc. And then we started working with the Japanese military. But it took days. We would have expected it to take hours, and it literally took days before we could figure out the roads that hadn't been affected, how you get up to them, get the gasoline or the fuel, and start moving it. So the supply chain and the logistics to the disaster area was probably the most difficult. It was a full 6 days before we had accounted for all but one of our associates. So, you know, we lost an associate who drowned in the tsunami. It took us 4 days to even know if the stores were still standing and the damage to our distribution center. 2 of the stores were so badly devastated by the tsunami that we basically had to gut them. One has reopened, one we still will not reopen until actually Saturday. That store will finally reopen nearly 6 weeks later. In terms of the actual relief, we, I think, are proud of one thing, and I think it's a global lesson for, I don't care what the economy is, there has to be a level of local autonomy and authority given because when comms don't work, if you have a very hierarchical approval process, folks just will sit there waiting to be told what to do. And in the first 12 hours, our store managers got together and they made the decision. We had no electricity. We have a rule that if there is an earthquake, you're not allowed to leave customers and associates back into the store. Frankly, it wouldn't have mattered because the cash registers didn't work, etc. They just started giving away all of the water that they had in stock and all of the produce and all of the ready-to-eat meals that they knew in 24 hours would not be sellable anyway, and started giving it away. And we gave away nearly $1 million in the first several days of goods that were in those stores. We couldn't operate because there was no electricity, and you just can't possibly operate normally. They did that without formal authority. They did this without having gone up the chain and gotten approval. They just did it because they knew it was the right thing to do. We didn't necessarily have a formal policy to that effect, but we're starting to come up with a more formal policy to store managers such that if a community is desperately in need of just basic food and sustenance, they're allowed to donate that on behalf of the company because it's the right thing to do. So I'm pleased by how much effort went in the early days to support the relief supply at a local level. And then globally, we actually stepped up. We made a $5 million within days commitment to relief supplies from the Walmart Foundation. A lot of that was blankets and tents and in the form of cash. We did a lot of work and are still doing a lot of work to support our associates. I think 50 of them's homes have been washed away. For those were stores we couldn't reopen, we continued to pay full salaries, and those individuals are now actually doing formal work around recovery or aid that is the local government. So we'll give about 30,000 hours away. It's all sort of it's the right thing to do when you're a member of the community like we are, but it did not happen in as systematic a way as I wish it could have, and that's to me one of the big lessons. This was the Sendai fault line. This is the Tohoku, the North fault line. This was not the Kanto fault line. There's a much threatened earthquake in Tokyo that's been talked about for decades. The last one was 26. It's usually happened about every 70 years for the last 400 or 500 years. We've learned a lot from what happened in the north because we have 10 times the number of stores and 10 times the population associate base in Tokyo. And we're learning a lot to ensure that if it happens, and hope it doesn't happen, but if it were to happen again, we'll be a lot better prepared to react faster and get the supply chains back a lot sooner than occurred in this particular disaster.
I think it's ironic that you say they're a logistical challenge. I mean, Walmart invented logistics. It's easily the premier logistics company in the world.
A road is a road is a road.
A road
right?
is a road is a road. That's right.
And for me, I think as we looked back, some of the biggest issues we had was that I've driven the road from Sendai to Tokyo, and I've done it recently, and it takes about 3.5 hours. In the first week afterwards, it was taking 15 to 18 hours
Wow.
to make that trip. And even though we were sending 8, 10, 15 2-ton trucks up with supplies, it was basically a parking lot. And then the added complexity, and this is the triple threat that I don't think anyone was prepared for, and I think many countries are reevaluating how they look at nuclear power plants, is that when the whole nuclear situation happened, huge debate among various governments as to what should be the radius of the no-go zone. We took a bit of a conservative view, and we took the 80-kilometer, which meant that the main highway was no longer accessible to us. So we told our folks, look, we don't know what's happening with this issue in terms of radiation. So we actually had to add more time to the supply chains for our own safety decision, but it added another 6 to 7 hours to their trip up to Sendai with the supply chain.
Have any of your employees been affected by the radiation?
No. We had some that lived in that 30-kilometer and therefore can't return to their home. We had 2 stores, one at 57 kilometers and one at 62 kilometers. We initially took an 80 kilometer, so we did not reopen those 2 stores until we could get better data. You know, there was very different opinions.
Right.
The IAEA seemed to support what Japan was doing, but a number of governments came out with strong nuclear reliance that said that it wasn't far enough. So we were conservative the first 2 weeks, but we've now since reopened those, and we still have the standard government approach of 30 kilometers is a no-go. So none of our associates, none of our supply chains, nothing can go within that 30 kilometers.
When you got off the plane, 15 hours of not knowing anything, what did it feel like when you got off the plane?
My situation's probably a bit unique because my wife is Japanese and her mother's side of the family is from Sendai. So in addition to my corporate role, I had on the family side a lot of concern because there were members of the family who couldn't be found. So it was incredibly stressful in the sense that, you know, a lot of people wanted results, and we were missing so much information even 15 hours later. You know, one of the issues that came up quite a bit was that, you know, a mobile phone uses 2 to 3 times the normal battery pace when it's constantly searching for a network. My wife's cousin's teenage son was in school, and that's in the tsunami hit area. They all evacuated, and they took him to an evacuation center. But their phone batteries tapped out before they could be contacted. Right. They're underage, so they're not allowed to leave. They have to come and be claimed. But there was no way for him to contact anyone. It took 4 days to find him.
Wow.
And you just hear story after story. It took us 6 days, with each manager taking responsible for all the associates in their store, to track them all down, because literally you had to go to one of the 220 evacuation centers looking for people because they simply could not make contact through normal technology. So it was that lack of information as I got off the plane that was probably the most stressful. For me, it was trying to figure out how to sort through all of the offers for help. There was not a lack of global good wishes, intent, offers of not only financial but goods, even the offer of associates from around the world saying we're willing to come and help support the stores that are in the stricken area if necessary. And you simply have to figure out quickly how to sort through that, prioritize, and understand what the government's needs are.
So how did you sort through it?
Well, the first thing we did is we had contact with the local government because...
Did they contact you, or you?
We contacted them.
Okay.
We contacted the U.S. government, both in Washington, D.C., and as well in Japan. Really impressed by the U.S. military and the Yokota Air Base, and they just got on with helping us do the right thing. I mean, they gave us use of helicopters to bring goods. Frankly, we would not have been able to react as quickly. And I was in Sendai several weeks ago. I met with the governor of Miyagi Prefecture, and he commented on the fact that we were the first to reopen, the first to go back to 24 hours, and were the most visible in helping the community in terms of goods and waters, etc. So for me, it was understanding what they wanted, because if they have 1 million blankets, bringing in a lot of blankets is not value add to the process. It's to understand where they see gaps in their preparedness that we, working with them, began to try and quickly move. Some of it had to happen offshore, and then just to focus on our own people and our own associates.
Had Walmart learned something from Katrina?
For Japan, actually, Chile was the most relevant to us. So our colleagues in the Disaster Relief Center in our home office in Bentonville, Arkansas, runs 24/7, incredibly helpful, because they had a long list of these are the things you're going to have to deal with quickly. And this is what we learned in Chile.
And that was already sort of activated
Absolutely.
When you got off the plane.
When I got off the plane, that had already happened. They were already doing kind of hourly calls. The next day, we started it twice daily because the country president had actually been on a plane as well. He was diverted to Sapporo, And it was, I think, 12 hours by road and train for him to get back to Tokyo. So the next day is when we started our twice daily normal pace into the categories of first, associate safety, what's happening. The second is what's happening on relief. And then the third is first operational assessment. It was about 7 days later we could move from assessment into more operational recovery and supply chain integrity, et cetera. But as I got off the plane, yeah, absolutely. That was already moving forward, and we had already been getting documents saying, this is what we learned in Chile, here's the standard approach. So, we did learn a lot because Chile was an earthquake. There wasn't a tsunami. There was no nuclear disaster. I don't think the world has dealt with something as significant as this triple threat. So we're documenting it, hopefully never having to use it. It's a bit like an insurance policy.
It's interesting to me to listen to you talk about the policies and procedures in the office that kind of puts things into gear, and at the same time you have store managers, employees who are activated by their values,
yes,
who want to do the right thing. It seems to me it's a very powerful combination when you've planned for something like this, but the plans and the policies don't prevent people from acting on their values and try to do the right thing.
Ed, it's interesting you raise that because Walmart has a very strong corporate culture, and it certainly is unique. We talk about respect for the individual, and we talk a lot about giving back to the community. And I think it is that combination. Any individual, and this is an old philosophy that was started by Sam Walton himself, any individual in the company had the right to go talk to Sam Walton when they felt something was wrong, when they felt that we had done the wrong thing, we were headed down the wrong road, there was an individual who wasn't living up to the corporate values. And we have tailored that to each country. It's a different, Japan is a far more hierarchical culture and society. It's not the norm to walk into the president's office. There's other mechanisms you create that culture. I think that is the culture that led to individuals feeling empowered to do the right thing, as opposed to thinking that, unless I have formal approval, I'll get into trouble afterwards. And I don't think that we had realized how powerful that was. We look back with it and now say that's not only the right culture to have, but maybe we should, for the future, make it a little bit more formal with our store managers to say, here's an example, and we do learn in our company a lot by examples and stories. This happened for all the right reasons. Remember this in the back of your mind. This is a good thing. This is how we want as a company to behave.
Walmart's been criticized about its role in communities, yet you find the company doing extraordinary things around the world. What's the link between extraordinary responses like your one in Japan and others I could name, and what most people think of Walmart: everyday low price, live better, those kinds of things? What's the link between really taking care of the communities you're in and building them and everyday low price, for instance?
It's been interesting for me. I've been with the company nearly 2 years. I have a long career in Asia. I moved to Asia 20-some years ago. My perception of Walmart as an organization was kind of a dated 1980s Americana kind of view, and didn't really have much of a chance to update it. So, as I joined the company 2 years ago and got to know our businesses in China, Japan, and India, what's very clear to me is all of that angst is about the United States. All of the media that is the criticism, et cetera, is very U.S. based. And I certainly have a point of view. I think, quite honestly, the bigger you are, the higher the standard you're held to. Fair enough. I think that is something that is appropriate. I think it's appropriate for corporations. I think it's appropriate for individuals. But at the same time, it becomes a bit of an easy target at time for the ills of the world. And, I've made the comment often that it feels in many instances, when you look at the core issue of the complaint, it's a bit like blaming the thermometer for the temperature. You know, we serve our customers, and our customers vote with their feet. We couldn't do something if our customers didn't support it. And, you know, the conversation around, for example, the impact on small businesses, well, I'm sorry, it's inefficient. And our customers want better prices. They want to use their cash to do something more in line with their needs, etc. But Walmart becomes the thermometer of that movement. And at times it's unfair, I believe.
But you've changed. I mean,
but that's the
company's
U.S.
changed to deal with.
That's the U.S.
And
I think certainly starting 6-7 years ago, a far greater effort was put into sustainability, into community relations, right, around programs, etc. But I think the U.S. perception, it takes maybe a little bit longer. There is zero transfer of any of that into my markets in Asia. In China, we're actually seen as an important industry, retail, and Walmart is a visible face to the Chinese government and the population in creating modern retail. We've learned from how to balance the needs of our customers with our corporate responsibility. So, for example, we have the direct farm program in China. We have over 1 million farmers who are part of our program. And so if you were to go to a store in Beijing and buy a turnip, there would be the face of the farmer whose acreage that came from. Now, he does that with pride, but we train them on the right chemicals that can be used, planting methods. Their productivity has gone up, so they earn more. We're able to cut out the middleman. We're able to increase the freshness, but we're also able to attest to the integrity of the product because food safety is such an important issue in China. That program is very well recognized, not only by our customers, not only by the community, but also by the government as the right direction to go down. There is no knee-jerk reaction other than positive in China. The same can be said in Japan, where we're a relatively smaller business, even at 440 stores. And in India, where we have just recently, in the last couple of years, entered with a partner, the media coverage is more around what the impact is to foreign direct investment in retail in India and the role that we could play, etc. But the criticism is uniquely American.
It's interesting. I mean, I think your example is one where communities win, customers win, suppliers win, employees win, shareholders win.
We look for them constantly, those opportunities.
Yeah, good. A lot of people think about business as it's only about the shareholders. One of the things I think that made Walmart great is you've understood that in a way that's not true. That Walmart is a business and it's set in society. And you've just talked about how it's clearly a part of the community in China and Japan. What can we learn for how we understand business as set in society as opposed to outside society? What are some of the lessons for us that really go beyond Walmart?
Yeah, I think you know I've worked for 3 major multinationals. I've seen very different corporate cultures. I've seen very different philosophies in terms of what is the focus on value creation. I personally believe if you look at the future of economic growth, we're now entering the century of Asia. If you were to look at where the mass of GDP growth will come over the next 100 years. Asia is probably the most complex portfolio of cultures, countries, economic development today, religions, languages. You could continue on for a very long period of time. But there is I think, shared or universal value, which is that a singular focus of a large organization on shareholder value is not a long-term successful proposition. It will not succeed. I think that certainly in China today, individual and personal wealth is a huge aspiration, and you certainly see many, many examples of it. And the Chinese people love a successful entrepreneur in China. There is a lot of that hero worship, and I think that's a good thing, and I think it's positive. But when I look at the public's perception of organizations, whether they be foreign companies, whether they be Chinese companies, it's all about what you give your customer, how you give back to your community, and only third does shareholder value come into that equation. I think that if I look at India, there is still that sense of a populist view that organizations have a higher responsibility than individuals. And I don't think that any company will succeed in Asia without having a very strong and credible focus on, first, its customer, second, its associate employment base, and third, but not at a discounted level, the shareholder, because frankly, you need continual access to capital to build. But if you're only going to focus on the shareholder, you will not stay in business. The system will thwart you. There's just no way it'll work.
So the idea is to see how those go in the same direction rather than to make trade-offs between them.
And I think what Walmart has learned through the focus on the direct farm program. The direct farm program is an offshoot of a sustainability initiative that we put forward, which is to, one, reduce our greenhouse gas by 20%. The second is around reducing to zero the waste that we put back into landfills, et cetera. The third was around creating sustainable supply chains. We are a very large grocer in the world, and the direct farm program was first and foremost around how we try and create this sustainable supply chain. And then one of the win-win benefits that came from it was the fact that farmers' incomes began to increase as, one, the middleman started getting pushed out, and second, we started improving their productivity inherent in us getting a more sustainable agricultural access. So it was not intended as a business case that said, if we do this, the following four benefits, and therefore all of this is going to come down to your NPV. It was more, this is the commitment we've made as a company, let's go do it. And as we did it, we've learned that there were all these side benefits that we hadn't really realized would occur. And it's that kind of synergistic, if you go in with the right intent, with the idea that either your customer or your community or your associate employee will benefit, quite honestly, you get a lot more shareholder value return than probably you had initially expected.
What have you learned about working with NGOs, especially NGOs in Asia? I know you worked with them around the disaster relief, et cetera. What's that process like? Because I'm not sure a lot of businesses understand kind of what that process of working with NGOs is like.
You know, it's unfortunate that the acronym has come to represent maybe a bit of a negative or adversarial relationship when it comes to business. I think, you know, a lot of business people that I speak to, you bring up NGO.
They're the enemy.
Well, they have a lot more creative definitions of that acronym than non-government organization. Right. Trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's unfortunate. There are NGOs who are not there to collaborate for the better good. They're there to make a non-negotiable point that in many instances doesn't reflect the opinion of the general population. And I think that's the group that has had the unfortunate outcome of creating a bit of a concern about working with NGOs. We have been very successful in working with NGOs. The whole Japan disaster, a lot of the activity we were able to do through the Red Cross, which is a pretty large NGO that has, operations just about everywhere. We're working with a lot of more regional NGOs on the sustainability initiatives, on how we tackle the challenges of sustainability. Because, It's been said to me, and I think it's a fair statement, by an individual in a very developing economy. Sustainability is the luxury of the wealthy. And his point was, and I think it's a valid point, sustainability in developing markets has to be tied with improving the lot of life of the individuals that are affected by the program. And I think that most individuals in mature economies see moves towards sustainability as either being expensive or restrictive in some way. Whereas I think a lot of good NGOs in Asia, in these developing markets, have figured out programs that are not only sustainable, but have the offshoot, the benefit of being able to support the local population. A lot of them around agriculture. A lot of them related to how you manage water. Things where, in fact, you're able to give them better potable water, but you're actually reducing the toll on the amount of fresh water that's being used for daily activities. And I think when I look at where NGOs are very beneficial, it's in those developing markets where the unique nature of either the country, the language, the population, etc., they're going to be better subject matter experts than maybe some of the global NGOs, and are going to be more interested in partnering and collaborating on a solution as opposed to just wanting you to write a check. And when we actually look at programs, we're not wanting to just write a check. We're wanting to have an impact that is visible in our stores, that is visible in our supply chain, that's visible to the community and visible to our associates. Because, frankly, one of the biggest groups that expect a lot from us are of our nearly 2.2 million people around the world. They have very high expectations for us on this topic.
Is sustainability like, you're probably too young to remember, but I do, like quality. People used to argue, well, you can make higher quality stuff, but it's going to cost you. And not only did we learn in the U.S., we learned this from the Japanese automobile manufacturers for that. Not only was quality free, but that it was a tremendous driver of lower cost and competitive advantage here. Is sustainability the same thing?
Absolutely. I do remember the quality, the Kaizen, the Six Sigma, all of those initiatives. Interestingly, the offshoot I always felt that came from that is customers received a better product that was, in many instances, because improving the quality a lot of times reduced the cost because the wastage got knocked out, a better product at a lower price. Sustainability in many instances we're seeing has the added benefit as we go into it of helping us reduce inefficiencies, and therefore we're able to not only improve the sustainability of product lines, and this is in particular around fresh and produce, etc., but it actually reduces the cost. Because as we've had to get involved, a lot of times unsustainable activity is actually inefficient activity. Some by definition would say that is unsustainable. But from an environmental viewpoint, but as well from a cost viewpoint, it turns out to be unsustainable. So we do see that in many instances, as we do well on that commitment to reduce greenhouse gas, reduce waste, to create a more sustainable supply chain, we're able to take out cost and pass on lower prices to our customer, which is the whole everyday low price, everyday low cost philosophy of the business. So it doesn't have to be a one or the other. You can actually achieve both.
Better, faster, cheaper, greener.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to the earthquake for a second. What do you see as the long-term effects of not the earthquake and the crisis so much, but the way Walmart's dealt with this? What do you see as sort of the long-term effects for Walmart?
Yeah, I think the first is it reaffirmed the model we have of the emergency disaster centers. And we have them in every country, but it formalized the need to maybe invest a little bit more in technology and as well to do a better job of more regularly transferring the best practices books around the world. And certainly that's underway as we speak now. For us as a company, I think it reinforced the unique position and by definition, then responsibility, because we're mass in the countries in which we do business, both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of supply chain, and in terms of associate base. We have the unique opportunity, if we're well prepared, to react faster and have a greater initial impact when, frankly, people are the most shocked by what's occurred. You know, some of the stories I hear from associates of, you know, we had a particular store that I had visited, and I met with an associate who's now working in a different store because this one's been washed away, is that the earthquake happened and this 75-year-old woman still made the decision with tsunami warnings to drive to the store. And so, wow. So all of our folks were up on the roof, and she drove into the parking lot, and they could see the wave coming. And he jumped down. He had water up to his waist. He got her out of the car. He took her back up there. And, you know, it was not only an individual heroic action, but the fact is he was one of 2,000 people who were doing similar things in the community, knowing full well that we were going to support them, that we were doing our best in the background to try and get all of the things required that were going to be required for recovery moving in that direction, because we talk about this as a company. And I think that, you know, we will talk a lot more about this and probably more visibly in our countries than we've had up till now. We did well. We had a China earthquake 2 years ago that you're probably aware of. It was remote, had its same logistical challenges, dropped out of the news much faster, but the same number of citizens were affected, and we did sort of the same thing. We've not dealt with it in India, and we're now escalating and accelerating our plans for an India disaster relief. We're still small. We have less than 100 stores. We have 5,000 to 6,000 folks there. But what we realize is that we could even have a more meaningful impact in a place like India, where there's even more of a challenge in terms of logistics, et cetera. So it just reaffirmed our commitment. We learned our lesson from it. We're going to be a little bit more vocal and probably a little bit more disciplined in how we're going to start rolling that out into more countries that we do business in.
What's Walmart's role in this? I mean, isn't disaster relief, isn't that the role of government? Why should Walmart, I mean, I understand taking care of your associates, but why should Walmart be doing the kinds of things that it's doing?
You know, I think that Katrina and now the Tohoku earthquake have shown us that, you know, when you say government, it brings all of these images, but at the end of the day, it's X number of people who are probably a rather minor % of the population for which they're responsible. In a mass disaster, they can't possibly be in all the places doing all the things that are expected. And I think that it falls to the community, and we're just a part of that community, to step in and support the government in trying to do this. And as I said earlier, we are very clear that we are not to usurp the authority or usurp the plans of the government. We should work as a collaborative partner. So it's a bit like in any challenge, whether it be academic, whether it be business, etc., you bring a team together and you try and assign responsibilities so that the net outcome is much greater than necessarily the tasks or the actions of any individual. So we just are a public face. We are almost by definition a network. We have stores, we have distribution centers. In many instances, we have more of a disaster preparedness network inherent in having stores with product in them than just about any organization, retailers in general. And as a result, I think that puts us in a unique responsibility. One of the things that happened after the first couple of days, and as we started bringing in supplies, customers of Walmart, of our stores in Japan, just started coming to our stores. They didn't know if we were open. They had no idea if anything was left. But when they said, you know, I need water and I need food, their first reaction was to first come to one of our stores. Now, because we couldn't go into the stores, we started setting up facilities in our parking lots. And, you know, I've been to some of these things. You know, I was 3 weeks ago, I was at one of our stores. There were still overturned cars in our parking lot. Wow. And there were still, though, in the center of it, tables set up where we were giving away giving away water. We were giving away instant noodles. And for folks who wanted to buy things like towels and those sorts of things, we had sort of somebody with a calculator, and we had the ability to conduct a minor amount of retail at the same time. The reaction of the community was to look towards their retailer as a part of that disaster relief. And I think that's the role that Walmart played by, as quickly as possible, reestablishing that supply chain so that as our customers came in, they had the chance to be able to get that access. And when I visited the store where there were the overturned cars in it, etc., on the entrance, because the store was boarded up, we've since reopened it, all of these notes from the local community, from just, customers. And one in particular that stuck out with me was a thank you note from one particular customer who said, "I'll never forget that you got me diapers and infant formula." She said, "I can't wait for you to reopen. I will always be a Walmart," in this case, Seiyu is our banner, shopper in Japan. And, loyalty like that is hard earned, but once you have it, boy, is it valuable.
What are the tough challenges that you face in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think we need to follow the lead of the government. I believe that, overall economic recovery is the responsibility of how they will allocate capital, how they will continue with their monetary policy. These are macroeconomic decisions that, we leave to the government and don't have a strong point of view on. We are there to compete in Japan. For me, if I look at some of the things that we see as a challenge, it's how do we live up to that responsibility to the community, to the associate base, but also to our shareholders. We do have that responsibility. And I had the pleasure of meeting with the prefectural government, who took time out of, obviously, his incredibly busy schedule. He's responsible for an awful lot. There is, you've seen the pictures, you've seen the video. You can't imagine, I've been there, you can't imagine the sense of sitting at around 3 kilometers inland at a rather high place, looking forward and looking as far as the eye can see on either side, the devastation. I mean, we're talking hundreds of kilometers of abject devastation. And that is going to take years to recover. And it's an infrastructure. And for us, we made the commitment that one of the things that we learned in our Chile, we have the ability to put up basically temporary stores. If they'll get us water and they'll give us electricity, we'll be able to set up very quickly tent type that can handle, relative storms, etc., temporary stores. And we do it in a way that is, low cost, so we can offer low priced goods, but our associates feel good, the community feel good, but there's still a return for our shareholders, because at the end of the day, the model has to be sustainable in terms of value and the creation of value. For me, I think it's just going to be a long time to just simply clean up all of that. It'll take years. And our challenge is, how do we help in a productive way that looks after those 3 stakeholders and support the government by, as much as possible, doing what we do well, staying out of the way, and I think, making everyone proud we're there. I don't know what's going to happen on the nuclear piece. It's not changed. And I think inherent in not changing, it's dropped off a bit from the news. But it isn't solved. Right. It is a major issue. And I think, Japan is not alone, and one of the biggest challenges is revisiting some long-held assumptions as to what is the integrity, physical integrity of those facilities. How many other nuclear power plants are on earthquake faults that were designed to go to a 9 earthquake? Well, we've now seen that a country that over-engineers things in terms of earthquakes, it was not designed for a 9, because that's what happened. And then you add on to that a tsunami, and how many others are within 5 or 8 or 10 kilometers, which in the tsunami in 2004, some of those went that far inland. The water and the damage is 8 to 10 kilometers inland. I think the world has to reevaluate this stuff. I think we'll do what we can to support Japan, but I think that's also a major challenge for the country.
What did you learn about leadership as this played out from the time you got on the plane to where you are today?
In a situation like this, the need to move quickly and the need to direct requires a residual trust among your team, and that there's much talk about leaders in a crisis and individuals who step up and lead in a terrible crisis. Many have been successful because of their ability to garner and allocate resources more effectively than anyone else. But to me, what I learned from this was the fact that, I operated much like I operate in normal non-crisis times, which is you create an open forum for people to express opinions, you respect those opinions, and you try and make a decision without the intent to disregard people's feelings. And that creates a culture of trust. And I think that we reacted as a team quickly because we trusted one another. I think if you have an adversarial management culture, I think you will initially make progress because somebody's got to be in charge. But I think the sense of accomplishment and goodwill, and therefore the ability to sustain it for weeks and weeks and weeks, is far more difficult. We had, for the first 3 weeks, daily calls. Everyone was exhausted. Everyone was exhausted. I mean, it is very tiring to manage this level. If you don't have the right culture among your team, that stress can become destructive. What I learned is that, honestly, having that initial solid leadership team that's based on a level of trust and respect means that you can move quickly without a lot of second guessing, without a lot of wasted time, and without a lot of emotion that's really non-very value add. And especially as I've heard over the last couple of weeks on some of our other multinationals and how they reacted, a lot of them struggled. And what I found from some of the struggles, some themes, one, they didn't trust their local management, right? And so day in and day out, you get workarounds, but in a crisis, suddenly they're saying, okay, we're going to do it, and the local management is like, well, you guys don't speak Japanese. Exactly what are you going to do? And there was lost time, and there was an animosity that came out of it. They didn't trust their local team. The other area that I think where I saw they simply weren't prepared. I mean, they had absolutely no rule book out there. And the one thing I learned is, okay, crisis management is rather unique, but we had a well enough defined that everyone knew which book to pull off of the shelf to operate to. All of those things are basic, and it's got nothing to do with detailed analysis of strategy and financial, etc. It's around the basics of business that hasn't changed in decades.
Get people to respect them enough so they speak their minds. Create a culture of trust. You may not need the heroic leaders.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, Ed. It was a pleasure.